pallet today. The first thing that we do is we measure the stringer length, which is 48, by the overall width, which is 40. So this is a 48 by 40. So we're going to write down 48 by 40. Is it single face, meaning it has no bottom boards, or is it double face? This one is double faced because it has bottom boards. So we're going to circle double faced. The next question is it two-way or four-way? These notches determine whether it's two-way or four-way. If you can only enter the front and the back of the pallet on both sides, it's a two-way. If you can enter all four sides, meaning 1, 2, down below 3, and over here 4, then it becomes a four-way. So we're going to circle four-way. Reversible means that the top of the pallet and the bottom of the pallet are identical. That's not the case. You can see as soon as you make it a four-way, it's not going to be identical in this scenario. So we'll leave that one or cross it out, whichever you prefer. And now we're going to move on to measuring the stringers. We know there are 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. We're going to need to measure the thickness. We start at the 1, and as you can see, it's slightly under 1 1/8. So what is a 1/16 under 1 1/8? It's 1 1/16. I'm going to confirm that that's what we're going for, because a lot of times you will see varying specs or varying thicknesses due to saw curve or whatever the reason may be. So I'm going to measure all 3 just to confirm that that's what we're going for, and it is. They're all 1 1/16. So I'm going to write down 1 1/16. Now we're going to measure the height. Standard height is 3.5. There are some rare cases when you get into like roofing companies or big block companies that are putting 5,000 pounds or more. If they make a shorter stringer, shorter in height, the pallet becomes stronger. So you will see some heights at 2 3/4 or 2 5/8 in those scenarios. But 9 times out of 10, unless it's those industries, it's always going to be 3.5. Your length is always your first number here. This should always match. So we know that's 48 because we just measured that. And now we're going to move down to the top decks. First thing I'm going to do is count how many there are. And I notice right away that we've got a mixture of 5.5s and 3.5s. So now we need to figure out how many of each. I'm going to start with the 5.5 since it's on the outside and it's the lead. We've got 1 5.5, 2 5.5, 3 5.5. So we know there's 3. Now we need to figure out how thick they are. If you need to stop and write down that there's 3 right away, you can do that, or you can just keep moving depending on how comfortable you are here. This is slightly over 1/2 inch, but slightly under 5/8, which means it's 9/16. That's the number that's between your 5/8 and your 1/2 inch. So we've got 3 5.5 boards that are 9/16 by 5.5 by 40. I'm just confirming to keep it straight in my head while I'm measuring. So I'm going to go write that down before I forget it. We have 3 top deck that are 9/16 by 5.5 by 40. And I'm going to make a note that one of these is in the center. So 1 is in the center, and then we've got 2 that are leads. Just so I remember where that placement is. The next thing we're going to do is count how many 3.5s we have. We have 1 3.5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to write that down before I forget it. We have 6 top deck that are 3.5. And again, we know that this pallet is uniform. If you want to double check yourself and measure the thickness again, you can, but you know it's going to be uniform, should be uniform, unless it's reconditioned. This is new. So 9/16 by 3.5 by 40 is where that goes. Okay, if you want to just double check real quick, we have 9 top board. Let's just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's correct. 3 of them are 5.5s, 6 of them are 3.5. And that's exactly what I have written down. Double check. Okay. Now we're going to move to the bottom. Same thing. We have 2 different dimensions. We have the 5.5 inch leads, and we have the 3.5 evenly spaced inside the notch. So I'm going to measure the thickness on the 5.5. So I'm going to choose this one since it's easier to work with. I love when a pallet's sitting up like this because it's easier to measure. They're not always sitting up like this pretty, and we can see that it is slightly over the 1/2 inch mark, which is right here, but it's slightly under the 5/8 mark, which makes it 9/16. So we have, again, just confirming the 5.5, and you can see this is slightly under 5.5, but we know it's supposed to be 5.5. That's your standard cuts. Let's just check this one down here. See, that one's a little bit more than 5. See how that's 5.5, closer to 5.5. So we have 1, 2 bottom deck that are 9/16 by 5.5 by 40. And again, this number always matches your deck boards. This first number always matches your stringers. All right, and then we have the 3 in the center that are inside the notch. Again, that are same width. I mean, we know it's going to be the same width because it's new, but we'll just double check it here just for learning. It's 9/16 by 3 3/8, but we know standard's 3.5. So 3.5 by 40. So I'm going to write down 3 9/16 by 3.5 by 40. And on my 5.5, I'm just going to make a note that these are the leads. Again. Okay, moving over here. Is it flush? Flush means yes, there's no deck boards hanging off the stringers. It's all flush. So I'm going to mark flush. Is it nails? Yes, it's all nails. So we're going to mark nails. No staples. Notch. Okay, let's talk about the notch for a minute. Typically you want to measure how long is your heel of the stringer. On 4840s, it's typically 6 inches is standard. So we can see that this is real close to 6 inches minus 1/8. So I'm going to write 6 inches from the end of the stringer. That's where this goes. And then if you want to measure the depth of your notch, you again, make sure you're not pulling. I'm pushing in actually as I'm measuring this. It's slightly over about 1 inch. And the whole length of that notch, this is a 9-inch notch. 8.5, 9. Maybe I'll put it like this, you can see it better. So it's 1 inch by 9. So I would say 1 inch deep by 9 inches long, located 6 inches from the end of the stringer. Now I'm going to check for clipped corners and chamfer. Clipped corners would be here. If it was clipped, this piece of the pallet would totally be missing and you would see just a nice little cut on each end. Doesn't have clipped corners. My chamfer would be here for equipment to get over. A lot of times they'll saw out an area like this to make it a little bit thinner. So just right here, saw it down so that the equipment can go over that thick board. There's no chamfer on this pallet. So there's no clip corners, no chamfer. We're going to move down to the stencil, color code, and stamp. I'm going to look at the outside stringer. I'm going to look at the inside stringer for color. And I'm going to make sure I check both sides of the pallet just to make sure I'm not missing a stencil. And there's nothing. So there's no stencil, no color code, or no stamp. Special instructions, this would be like, is something butted, is there something funky I need to write down? I would write that down right here. And then in regards to the rest of this, I'm gonna ask my customer, do you have docks that you can unload a box trailer or a truck, or do you need them on a flatbed? here is where I will mark whether it's flatbed or van. And then I'm going to look at my stacking requirements, meaning do they have any special shorter dock doors where they can only go 15 high or 18 high. If they're a newer company, obviously we can go 20 to 22 high depending on the thickness of the overall height of the pallet and the material that's being used. So here is where I would write in my stack heights and my banding, if there's any type of banding going on. If they're pallets, maybe the last 4 stacks need banded because they're going long distance and they move around in the truck because of the sizes. Here's where I would mark, yes, we're gonna band full stacks of 20, and there's no preference whether we use metal or plastic. There's metal banding and plastic banding, and they do, if they require this, they oftentimes are recycling it, so they will typically have a preference, but in this case, we don't have a preference. I think that's it.